Alright, we're back. The greatest podcast of all time. We have reached episode 56. Imagine that, episode 56, if I may be so bold as to congratulate myself on my hard work over all of these years. So we're gonna get into a truly interesting and fascinating theory by Graeme Hancock, a name which I suppose many of you are familiar with. So in essence, his great theory is that there was an advanced civilization during the Ice Age which collapsed during the Younger Dryas period, so about 10,000 BC, something like that. So a period of great cataclysmic events that shattered that advanced civilization, and there were some survivors, and these survivors then traveled around the world to teach humanity to become civilized again. So we'll get into all of this things later on in the episode. So main topic of today, as you can see in the title of it, the Fingerprints of the Gods, and that is his first big book on the subject. Came out in 1995, so the theory has been out there for a while, and since then, by the way, more evidence has been unearthed. So good stuff. So we'll get into all of it. We'll go we'll discuss all of the evidence and everything he presents in his book. Well, perhaps not all of it, because it's a big long book, and he has written more books. I've read 2 of them, so Fingerprints of the Gods and Magician of the Gods. So that's a follow-up to his first book. And then, of course, as I mentioned in the latest episode, he has 2 seasons on Netflix. So rare Netflix W, the only good thing Netflix has ever done. Well, perhaps they've done something more good, I don't know. But usually Netflix is known for being quite degenerate and silly like that. But anyway, those documentary series, Ancient Apocalypse, quite good stuff indeed. So anyway, we have some updates we need to get through first before getting into the book itself, and we're gonna talk about all of these interesting topics. Now onto a training update, or rather a non-training update. As you perhaps saw, I posted on social media, I was struck down by the bubonic plague. So by the way, whenever I say that I've gotten some sort of historical disease, such as, the Black Death or bubonic plague, that's just a fun way for me to say that I've gotten a cold or something. Perhaps it was COVID, I don't know. It was a sickness that brought me low for a few days at least, and I might have mentioned this before, but I'll mention it again because it's life-saving information. If you have been sick, do wait an additional few days or even a week until you get back to the gym, because if you still have something in your body, it's absolutely not good for your heart to train, and under no circumstances train while you are sick. That's extremely stupid, and it's inconsiderate towards others, because you might contaminate them and thereby lower your own hamingya and karma, and of course it will be bad for you as well. So there is nothing hardcore about training when you're sick. It's only stupid, it's only inconsiderate, it's only something that I could never ever endorse. So nothing hardcore about it at all. Rest and take it as easy as possible, and then when you're fully back to health, then you can start training lightly again to get back into it. So I've had a few light sessions, just getting some blood flowing, nothing heavy, nothing strenuous. I err on the side of caution here, so I can get back into it properly in a while. So that's my training and health update, and as I noted on social media as well, posted on both Instagram, X and Telegram, about a little gaming review, since I have been struck down by the bubonic plague. I, aside from, responding to emails and stuff like that, and doing my fatherly duties, I used this opportunity to power game a bit, because if you are sick and you can't really do much else productive, then you can always game a bit. So I tried Age of Empires for the Sultan's Ascend DLC, which is good enough, I suppose, DLC. Not something I would recommend to anyone who's not a great Age of Empires fan, but as you all know, I have grown up with the Age of Empires games, and they are very close to my own heart, so it's a bit special for me, I could say. But yeah, hopefully they can release a DLC where you can play as the Crusaders. I know they released a DLC where you can actually play as the Templars, but I want a campaign set in that time period during the Crusades, and you play as the Templars, or something like that. So anyway, that was my take there, and as I posted about in the post, by the way, we're deep into highly autistic territory here, so excuse me if you're not into Age of Empires. I fully understand that this might not be super relevant to the topic of ancient civilizations and lost cities underwater and everything like that. I understand, maybe not super relevant, but yeah, this is the style of the podcast at least, that I have a few updates before I get into the main topic. So anyway, that about Age of Empires 4, and as I said, I would like the unit icons to have some nice artwork instead of just a small silhouette of a unit. Anyway, again, I'm a sensitive artist, I am an enjoyer of Age of Empires, so you'll have to excuse this tangent. Then I also managed to play the Age of Mythology Retold campaign, so it was a bit of a nostalgia trip as well to play as Arkantos again, so the Greek myth, and it was quite fun. I could actually show my elder daughter some of the scenes, some of the cinematics from that campaign as well, because you in one mission you actually have to rescue Odysseus and his men from Circe when they have been transformed into pigs, and we actually have a nice book. It's titled Usborne Illustrated Stories from the Greek Myths, so that I read often to my elder daughter, and the Odyssey is included in those stories. So she's familiar with Circe, so it was fun to show her. And then some mythological creatures as well, such as the Hydra. She likes Hercules as well. Unfortunately, their Norse mythology equivalent isn't as nice as the Greek one for some reason, but yeah, it's good stuff at least. Maybe I'll post a picture on it, so if you have children yourself, you can read. It's very cozy, highly recommended fatherhood activity to read at night. So the basic night routine is big glass of milk and then stories, a few stories. So it's good times. Now, moving on to a topic that is absolutely not good times. It's something that is quite blackpilling, to be honest, but I want to talk about it briefly anyway. We have to talk about the boomer generation, and this is something I don't think I've ever gone on a rant about boomers, but I have to do it, and I realize full well that there are plenty of exceptions, and boomers from one country, they can differ from boomers from another country, so we're mainly talking about Western Europe and the colonies, so America and Canada, etc. So funnily enough, communism actually shielded some of the boomers in the East a bit more, but then again you have boomers such as Putin, who talks about, Western Europe being oppressive against the third world and everything like that. Now, of course, I don't know if he actually believes that. I've called Putin an insufferable boomer on X on a few occasions. I don't know if he's just posting about it to gain sympathies from the third world or whatever, but yes, the boomer mind virus, we can say. And here's something to keep in mind as well, that it's no use to rant overly much against boomers, but rather the mechanisms which made the boomer generation so insufferable and so toxic and detrimental to European civilization. So if we want to point a finger, then we can point to hyper-individualism and atheism, basically. Perhaps the most godless generation of all time, the boomer generation. And yeah, it's been a catastrophe. So I wanted to mention all of this first and foremost because the main topic of this episode is, of course, Graeme Hancock's great theory. He is a boomer, and when you read his work, it becomes apparent that he's a bit of a hippie boomer when he talks about, humanity being one, and we need to realize that we're all brothers and sisters, and hippie nonsense like that. I know he means well, but the boomer mentality comes in every once in a while, and I know he's a bit of an enjoyer of drugs. Now, of course, he's not someone who's a degenerate in that sense. He's a spiritual seeker, so I can have an understanding here, but still, if you read his books, be aware of it. Now, I will say though, and I will get into this later in the episode as well, that it's not something that takes away from from his arguments or anything like that. It's just sometimes he throws it in there, and if you listen to interviews of him, sometimes he says silly things, but yeah, you can just take it for what it is. It's the cursed boomer spirit that possesses him to make him say silly things like that. But anyway, on to the main reason for me talking about boomers. We had the tragedy the tragic murder of Austin Metcalf in good old America. And this is, of course, as I say repeatedly, basically not a single day goes by without one of our people, so of European blood, getting killed or otherwise harassed or whatever by one of these other ethnicities, in this case an African American. And the very day after, his father, a boomer, goes out to say it's not about race, and it's almost like he's trying to plead and appease the other side. It's truly disgusting. It's so grotesque that I didn't even know what to say. It was too absurd. I was reminded of the Clown World meme that went around in 2019 when things were so absurd that you just posted a Clown Pepe frog to as a response to whatever silliness was being said. So anyway, and then he has said some other things, and a very disturbed individual, the father of the killed young man here. Very, very disturbing indeed. I don't wanna get too black-pilled because we have, as I said, a very fascinating topic to talk about instead. So anyway, my own take here is that a multiracial society is a society where you will have constant conflicts. It is what it is. You can't have these multicultural, multiracial societies. It simply doesn't work. And I know it's hard to hear for many Americans, but I'm just speaking the truth. You can't have it. And then, of course, when it comes to boomers, the only take I have is that hyper-individualism is bad. So individualism can be good, but when it gets too much, it's absolutely detrimental. And atheism is not good if you replace a belief in something higher, in my case, the European gods, with another religion. So in his case, this boomer's case, it's racial equality, civil rights mentality, or whatever it might be, political correctness, equality. That is a religion for these individuals, and that makes them completely insane, in my humble opinion. So that is what we can learn from this tragedy. At least multiracial societies do not work, and atheism is bad. Ultra-individualism is also bad. Now, on a last note before getting into the book itself, discussing the arguments, the evidence, and everything like that, I do want to say something about Graeme Hancock that bothers me ever so slightly, or perhaps quite a bit, to be honest. So he's from good old Albion, British man, and as you all know, Britain is perhaps the country on earth that is the hardest hit by madness. So you have a two-tier policing system. You've had foreign rape gangs targeting young white British children, and police covering it up. So one of the most grotesque tragedies in human history. I don't know what else could possibly be worse. You've had tragedies in war, of course, when the Mongols invaded both Europe and the Middle East. They built towers of skulls, same thing with Tamerlane in later centuries, but that was war. There was a foreign entity invading and occupying, killing the men, enslaving women and children. That is something else, but a society which can't even protect its young girls like that and actually covers up the crimes of foreigners like that. It's so grotesque that I don't really know what to say. So anyway, you have this, and as a British man, you sort of have a responsibility to at least mention it, to at least say it once. In Graeme Hancock's case, he's an author. Sure, perhaps he doesn't need to write a book about it, but at least he could say it at some stage in an interview with Joe Rogan, for example. He could just say it. It takes him 30 seconds to just to highlight the great crimes that have been committed against the British children. He could do it, but he doesn't. Instead, he goes on about his struggle against organized archaeology, big archaeology, the academics of archaeology, and he has that as a big struggle, and it becomes a bit silly, a bit pathetic. I understand completely that Graeme Hancock is tired of all of these dorks in academia. I understand that they are dorks and they lack vision and they are just nitpicking and, sniping at him for decades, ever since 1995 when he published Fingerprints of the Gods. They've been at him, but still, you have to put it into perspective. Again, our civilization is crumbling before our very eyes, so a dispute in archaeology, whether there was an ancient lost civilization or not, it's really not a battle. It's not the battle at hand. It's not the quest at hand. The quest at hand is to, again, save our children from being tormented in this way, to save our civilization. That is the struggle, and every other, it's just a side quest. It's just a side thing. And if you don't see that, then I don't know what to say. So I applaud Graeme Hancock. I am a great fan of his. I can honestly say I do like him. I do like the work he has done. And again, I understand if he's tired of this archaeologist, but when he presents this as a great struggle against archaeology and they are so oppressive, it's really like looking at two children at a playground fighting over a toy. It's not dignified. It's not dignified in the least. That all being said, let's get into the main topic at hand. Actually, a good segue into the main topic is to ever so briefly discuss an accusation he often gets by these dorks in academia, and they accuse him of being racist. Imagine that, dorks accusing others of being racist. Now, of course, in the current year, 2025, we don't care anymore. We no longer care about this silly word thrown around all the time by low-thumos individuals. But anyway, they call him a racist and white supremacist, despite having an Indian wife, an Indian Tamil wife, by the way. But they call him a racist because he shares what the Native Americans said, so Aztecs and Incas, what they said about the origins of their own civilization. And they said that fair-skinned, bearded men came to teach us things. And since he is sharing the stories of the Native Americans, then they call him a racist. So, and then of course his counter to that is that he says, why am I the racist? You should be the racist who don't take these Native Americans seriously. So the dorks then, they say, no, but it was only the Spanish who concocted these myths to justify their own takeover. But it doesn't hold up in the least. You can talk to, if you truly respect Native Americans, as I said in my latest episodes, I've always been interested in Native Americans, always had a certain respect for them, and if you truly do respect them enough to actually listen to what they have to say, respect them enough to listen to their own stories. So, anyway, we'll get into this. I just thought to mention it, that he gets called a racist because of that, and also because his main point is that there was an ancient civilization that taught these other later civilizations, so the Mayans, for example, taught them astrology, astronomy, agriculture, architecture, and everything like that. So then, in their view, so in the dorky view, the dorky academic view, is that he takes away their accomplishments. So basically what he is saying is that the Incas, they didn't build many of these monuments themselves. The Mayans, they didn't come up with their astronomy themselves, but they inherited it from others, from a previous civilization that taught it to them. So anyway, that is what these individuals are saying. But for me personally, if someone starts calling another individual a racist, I know that they don't really have many arguments of their own. So take it for what it is. Alright, we're jumping into the book. So I'm quoting now from Fingerprints of the Gods, The Quest Continues, by Graeme Hancock, and we're turning to chapter 6, titled He Came in a Time of Chaos. So it's page 49, and I quote, "Through all the ancient legends of the peoples of the Andes stalked a tall, bearded, pale-skinned figure wrapped in a cloak of secrecy, and though he was known by many different names in many different places, he was always recognizably the same figure, Viracochas, foam of the sea, a master of science and magic who wielded terrible weapons and who came in a time of chaos to set the world to rights. The same basic story was shared in many variants by all the peoples of the Andean region. It began with a vivid description of a terrifying period when the earth had been inundated by a great flood and plunged into darkness by the disappearance of the sun. Society had fallen into disorder and the people suffered much hardship. Then there suddenly appeared, coming from the south, a white man of large stature and authoritative demeanor. This man had such great power that he changed the hills into valleys, and from the valleys made great hills, causing streams to flow from the living stone. End quote. How about that? If you're a sensitive poet like myself, this is why you read books. This is why you read this kind of literature, to stumble upon epic quotes that you can share with your esteemed following. So yeah, I do like stuff like this. So it's from a myth, and again, Hancock, he uses these myths to strengthen his case of a great cataclysm and survivors going around the world after said cataclysm. So we're actually gonna get into the cataclysm itself. So then we turn to the other book I mentioned, Magicians of the Gods, and this came out in 2015. So yeah, 20 years later than the Fingerprints of the Gods, and during that time the science did its magic. So yeah, this was some evidence to strengthen his case. So I'm quoting now from page 38 from Magicians of the Gods. This epoch, which geologists call Younger Dryas, has long been recognized as mysterious and tumultuous. In 10,800 BC, when it began, the Earth had been emerging from the Ice Age for roughly 10,000 years. Global temperatures were rising steadily, and the ice caps were melting. Then there was a sudden dramatic return to colder conditions, nearly as cold as the peak of the Ice Age 21,000 years ago. This short, sharp deep freeze lasted for 1200 years until 9600 BC, when the warming trend resumed. Global temperatures shot up again, and the remaining ice caps melted very suddenly, dumping all the water they contained into the oceans. End quote. And I'm gonna continue to quote from page 93 of the very same book, so on the same topic. Meanwhile, my own hypothesis of an advanced civilization of prehistoric antiquity obliterated from the face of the earth during the Younger Dryas window is also strengthened by their work, for if their calculations are correct, the explosive power of the Younger Dryas comet would have been of the order of 10 million megatons. That makes it 2 million times greater in its effects than the former Soviet Tsar Bomba, the largest nuclear weapon ever tested, and 1,000 times greater than the estimated explosive power of all nuclear devices stockpiled in the world today. A global disaster of such magnitude at exactly the time I suggested in Fingerprints of the Gods does not prove the existence of a lost civilization of the Ice Age, but does at least provide us with a mechanism large enough, if such a civilization did exist, to have obliterated it almost entirely from human memory. End quote. So to summarize, the world had been warming from the Ice Age, things getting nicer and warmer, and then suddenly a great comet, boom, hits the Earth and causes things to take a turn for the worse. And this, by the way, this is where it ties in these ancient myths, including the biblical myth of the Great Flood, by the way. And this leads us into one of the most interesting topics of all time. Of course, we're talking about Atlantis. Now, I know Graeme Hancock is a bit hesitant to talk about Atlantis, because then he will be attacked even more by these dorks who do not believe in Atlantis. And just a disclaimer here on a personal note, I don't know if Atlantis was real, but generally my attitude when I'm unsure of something, if I haven't made up my mind, and by the way, this is not something I will stake my intellectual repetition on. You know, I have only one thing I ultimately care about, and that is regime change. So if there was an ancient land named Atlantis somewhere, perhaps in the Sahara, perhaps in the Atlantic Ocean, I don't know, I'm not gonna, it's not a hill I'm willing to die on, but I'm also very much willing to entertain that possibility. And this, by the way, if you are unsure, then it's a good idea to go with the most cool and fun alternative. So it's more cool and fun to actually believe in Atlantis. Something else to keep in mind here, if you look at the discovery of Troy, you had a German businessman, Heinrich Schliemann. He said, this place is real and I'm gonna find it. And then also you had this archaeologist, they said, you're crazy, it doesn't exist, it's just a myth. But he said, let's go, champ, let's go, he said. And they started excavating, and lo and behold, they found Troy. So this is also why I am quite sympathetic towards Graeme Hancock and his theory that he is more of a man of action. And he's been traveling the world, he's been at it for a long time, and he's really kept a high pace so trying to do the actual research, and who knows, maybe we will find it. So again, I'm not saying that Atlantis did exist, I'm not saying that it didn't exist, I'm saying that I hope it did, because it's the more fun thing, and it wouldn't surprise me in the least if some sort of evidence, archaeological evidence, pops up any year now, because after all, if you look at the last 10 years, there have been so many new findings on DNA, archaeogenetics, everything like that. And by the way, something we'll get into in a bit as well is Göbekli Tepe in Anatolia, so today's Turkey. It wasn't actually discovered when Graeme Hancock wrote his first book, The Fingerprints of the Gods, in 1995. It was discovered after, and that, of course, it gave credence to his theory. So anyway, main point, if you're in doubt, sure, you don't need to die on that particular hill that Atlantis was real, because again, probably your main concern is also regime change, but it's more fun, it's a more fun way to live your life when you're open to these cool possibilities. So it's an ever so important mindset to have. Anyway, that was a bit of a tangent. Let's get into Atlantis now. And I quote yet again from Magicians of the Gods, page 33. The Greek lawmaker Solon visited Egypt in 600 BC, and there he was told a very extraordinary story by the priests at the temple of Sais in the Nile Delta, a story that was eventually handed down to his more famous descendant, Plato, who in due course shared it with the world in his dialogues of Timaeus and Critias. It is, of course, the story of the great lost civilization called Atlantis, swallowed up by flood and earthquake in a single terrible day and night, 9,000 years before the time of Solon, or, in our calendar, in 9,600 BC. End quote. And this then coincides with the cataclysm of the Younger Dryas. So, a coincidence? I don't know. I am not a believer in coincidences, so in my humble opinion, it actually strengthens the case for Atlantis. Something else that he talks about at length throughout his books, and he has also written another book that I haven't read yet, but I will probably do so at one stage now, since I'm an enjoyer of the great work of Graeme Hancock. Anyway, it's called Underworld, and there he writes about underwater cities and palaces and other epic things of that nature. So anyway, the main point here I wanted to mention is that the sea levels back in the day, so during this time, they were a lot lower, and then when things started to heat up again, things got warmer, then a lot of water was released, and many previous land masses, they were overcome with water. So that's why you can find a lot of these temples on the sea bottom now. So that's something we can keep in mind if we're looking at evidence for a lost civilization, or many lost civilizations and cultures over all of these years, that it's not only on land, but it's also in water, underwater, that we can look for this kind of evidence. So all that being said, we'll go to a music break and we'll be right back. And of course, if you want to become an enjoyer of the greatest podcast, you can sign up. You can find all links at thegoldenone.se. So you can sign up on Subscribestar, Gumroad, Substack or Spotify. So, quick music break, and then we'll discuss the white-bearded civilizing heroes of myth.